The first question I want to ask you, you're leading in the polls. You've emerged as the most popular personal leader, but there's still 3 months into the election. How do you keep that momentum going? How do you not burn out the way others have?
The way to do it is to not take anything for granted. We know there are 3 months left in this campaign, so we're going to work tirelessly, morning, noon, and night across the country. That's why we're enjoying this tour so much in Northern Ontario, but we're not taking a thing for granted. Polls are nice, but you can't not put a poll in a ballot box, so we're just going to have to keep working right up until Election Day.
A story came out today talking about the enormous war chest that the Tories have before this election. They haven't yet sort of turned their guns on you, but they do have that earworm ad out about Trudeau. I'm not sure what kind of impact, but are you bracing for that sort of reaction from the Tories?
Yeah, I mean, don't forget, we give as good as we get. We put up an ad on social media last week that talked about facts around the Conservative record of corruption and conviction and police prosecution. And you know what? 500,000 people have seen that online. So they do have deeper pockets than we do, but I think that our spending is a bit smarter than theirs, and it's producing a good result.
Locally, there's a reason why Sudbury's vacant. Everyone knows about Glenn Thibault. Is there a personal stake or a personal interest for you to win back Sudbury or to hold on to Sudbury?
It's the same personal interest that I have in all 338 ridings in Canada. I want progressive NDP MPs representing those communities. You know, for too long we watched the old line parties get people elected and send them to Ottawa so they could learn what Ottawa needed. Well, I want people elected in their riding so that Ottawa knows what their riding needs. And that's what an NDP MP does. Look at Claude Gravel here in Nickel Belt. He goes to Ottawa and he explains what people need in his riding. That's the type of MP I want.
The Notley victory in Alberta, I think, was sort of a watershed moment in that no one ever thought the Alberta would go orange. How important is that for you nationally to sort of have that barrier broken?
It's a huge win for us because, you see, it reminds me a bit of what we went through in 2011. I know that Jack and I had been working for 5 years, shoulder to shoulder, across Quebec. I sensed that we could break through. And every time I would say that, the pundits and the analysts and the critics would say, you'll never break through in Quebec. Well, in 2011, we got over 50 seats in Quebec. And then in 2015, I think you could have won a sizable bet if you had been predicting that the NDP would win in Alberta a majority government. And yet that's exactly what we did. So what people saw then was the ability of the NDP to win. So that's why they're looking at us differently now, weighing our options. We're talking about clear, concrete things. $15 a day quality childcare across the country. Canadians get that. A $15 an hour federal minimum wage. People like that. Saying that people should not have to work till age 67 before they can retire. Stephen Harper didn't make that announcement in Sudbury. He made that announcement to billionaires in the Swiss Alps. We're saying we're going to roll that back from 67 to 65. That's also something that Canadians like a lot.
You've been in Sudbury for a few hours now.
Yep.
You've seen our roads. They're in pretty rough shape. I wonder what a Thomas Mulcair government would mean for infrastructure for municipalities.
Well, it's an important thing to understand that as the federal government downloaded on the provinces, especially under Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, and it continued under Stephen Harper, those provinces downloaded on the municipalities and the regional governments. But right now in Canada, we're living something that's not sustainable. We're asking municipalities to take up the cost of 60% of the infrastructure in the whole country with only 8% of the tax base. Well, that just doesn't work out mathematically. So the NDP will become a reliable, predictable, long-term partner for municipalities. We'll turn over more of the existing gas tax to municipalities so they can take care of things like housing, they can take care of things like transit and infrastructure. Those are the types of priorities the NDP's always cared about.
You mentioned the Ring of Fire, and that's obviously a big issue here. Clips is withdrawn. It seems to become such an incredibly complex and expensive project. I just wonder, do you still think it's still an economically viable project, and what would the NDP government do to...
Well, what you need is a government that's interested in developing and is going to have a plan and put the right people in place to work with the private sector, because the private sector is always going to try to do the same thing, get the governments to assume as much of the cost as they can. In all of this, we can't forget that First Nations have inherent rights, treaty rights, and Canada has international obligations to our First Peoples, so we have to take those into account. I would love to see the Ring of Fire developed intelligently, long-term, sustainably, adding the jobs here in Canada, the value-added jobs. Mr. Harper's approach has always been rip and ship, whether it's the oil in the oil sands or whether it's mining. You know, I'm so proud that Howard Hampton accepted to be my special advisor on the Ring of Fire. Everyone respects Howard. As I've traveled across Northern Ontario, the very fact that he's running for us federally now has got people engaged, it's got them excited. I'm excited about Howard, and he's going to play a key role in an NDP government.
Finally, it looks like you could emerge as the most popular leader, but without a majority. What's your stance on a coalition?
Well, as you know, we've opened that door any number of times, and the Liberals always slam it shut. My priority is to beat Stephen Harper and replace his Conservatives with a progressive government. We have a forward-looking, optimistic approach as to what we can accomplish together. I want to replace Stephen Harper's politics of fear and division with the politics of hope and optimism, and we have the confidence that we're going to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Great to see you.